go back and forth with who these people were. So one example of one of the interruptions, and this one tracks pretty closely to the English, is this moment where Max, who's the guy that you saw in the skirt a few slides ago, is apparently a theater enthusiast that we discovered along the way, and he recognizes the play when Petruchio gets to the Kiss Me Kate line. But sort of going through that scene, he's kind of figuring out what's going on, and finally he jumps up and announces that he's recognized the play. And the guy next to him is like, oh, it's Taming of the Shrew? And he's like, yeah, it's Taming of the Shrew. This last moment where Max breaks into English to explain to the women what they're yelling about is the only time that they speak English outside of the Shakespearean text. So that was actually also really important for us to find some way to explain how they could read the Shakespearean text at all. And so the last thing that we have for you, is a brief scene, which I wrote specifically for this purpose, which is just to give you an opportunity to kind of hear the language and sort of see physically what that looks like. We do have some text with us just for anxiety, because I'm a PhD student, not an actor. And so, yeah, so here we go. And so to set the scene for this particular one, this is one of the boys has made his way home to his superior at home, if you will, and is reporting back on what has just happened. So, quem fez?
Kaşa Malta.
Sambo Kare. Kare ihe na brodinko.
Ihe Selafri.
Var kete.
Benim işim.
Ah.
Yawanın eriş kindir bol dubraş al imkanem tukterim oğuş.
Santin. Pastor. Vad är masken? Är det skadat?
Nein. Då är Taffelfortesmach. Är det någon oğuş var eriş açın? Van açın mes danonderem ruski.
Sișmenaș, vătarul, închemeaș. Rădet Elena Brodinfăt. Uimărate. Deci, horbe carbuș. And see. Yes.
So I had a question regarding, you mentioned that at a certain point, the hunters sort of enter the play, and they get dressed up, and they become more feminine. So my question is, or like,
In some cases.
some cases, yeah, there's an attack.
In a case, yeah.
So my question is, clearly there's a bit of a binary system going on here, of like, the men speak this way, and the women speak, I'm assuming they speak the same kind of language, but they also speak English, in your case, because they're reciting the play. So I guess my question is, when this, I'm going to use feminization very loosely, but when this feminization starts to happen, did the language also start changing? Or did the way that the hunters sort of use the language start changing? Or did they remain, or I guess, did they remain fixed in the binary, or was there an attempt to sort of distance yourself from the binary that you created, or that you were showcasing on stage?
So the question is, once the men kind of entered into the Shakespearean world and had more access to a feminine world, to what extent did that influence the language? And for them, really, more than anything, what would happen is that you would hear from, so basically we had three kind of character types that we were working with, so it's not to limit you to the second. That's okay. So we had one guy who, the guy that you see in the skirt, who's kind of a performance enthusiast. He's a little more willing to interact with the world that is a bit more gender fluid, you could say. And he's willing to take any opportunity to get out there on stage. That's his whole thing. So if you're familiar with Taming of the Shrew, he makes an appearance as the haberdasher, as like the hat seller that comes and Petruchio eventually like kicks in the backside and sends out. And then he reappears as the widow. So he's actually playing a woman there when he has his skirt on. And it's very much about him getting to play anywhere. So increasingly what you hear from him is that he just uses the Shakespeare most of the time, or he switches to English. So when we hear the women speaking, they're speaking to each other in English all the time. There's actually one sequence, which is the one Alan mentioned, and the one that you saw where there's a pink dress on the floor. So that's the big scene with the haberdasher, and Alan comes in as the tailor, but Alan's resistant to the entire process and doesn't want any part of this performing, he doesn't want any part of this nonsense. Max, who's the widow, has already been ejected as the haberdasher. Alan's refusing to play the tailor, and so one of the women turns around and is like, will someone come please play this tailor? Like, we need to move the scene along. And here comes Max running in and is like, I was playing the tailor! And he just comes barreling in, but at that point he switched to English. So it does carry all the way through. So when and actually at that moment, there's immediately a fight between Alan, who's like, I can't believe you're doing this is ridiculous. And Max sort of kind of comes back at him and reverts, if you will, to a more kind of aggressive state. So he goes back into the language before then, actually Alan takes over and he does play the tailor. So, yeah. More questions? Yes.
So I write plays too, and I've been trying to ponder again on my now with TV being becoming more online oriented. I imagine it's more acceptable in the theater, but I've always been kind of a little hesitant because of there isn't enough motivatedness. There's too much arbitrariness that audiences might just like zone out at that point. I mean, with the very emotion-based language, it's kind of hard to zone out. But to get into anything that isn't quite so visceral, so my question is, how did the audiences react to it? How did they take it?
Sure. So I think what happened was that Shakespeare itself have that effect where people can kind of glaze over. And so what we do is, the approach we take is, we kind of have this idea that we're training our audience because they're there, they're in front of us, and we're in front of them. We get the opportunity to train them, if you would, to kind of tune their ear to what it is that we're saying, especially if you're using accent, if you're using Shakespeare. So to help them catch on to what's going on. So when we introduced this language, we took it, we did small, short lines, and try to train the audience to introduce that this isn't English, this isn't a recognizable language, this is something different. And then from there, we were able to add more and more text to the point where we had a monologue with the center character here. And the audience, what they did was, they enjoyed it because they started to understand Shakespeare because they couldn't understand our language. It forced them to grab onto what they would normally glaze over because their ear at this point was so attuned to trying to pick up something that they didn't understand. So Shakespeare lends itself really well to this opportunity.
And I think part of it is offering opportunities for interaction with it. So there was one of the actors, I wanted to give him, he was a third year, so he was at the end of his program, and I wanted to give him a nice big block of speech because I felt like there was just something virtuosic in doing a speech in a language he didn't know. And so that's what we did, and there was a sort of, the director was like, this is too much, people are going to get bored, and I was like, just wait. And so he gets up and he kind of goes and he's talking about like, we're going to capture you and we're going to do all this stuff and it's going to be horrible and we're going to take you as slaves, blah, 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 blah. And then he stops and there's this breath and the women all just kind of like look at each other and then look at him and I'm like, right. So anyway, we're just going to go on with what we're doing. But it provided this sort of opportunity for people to sort of sit with this moment of like, what are you saying? No? Oh, none of us know what's going on. Great. Okay, we're all on the same page now. So a lot of it, exactly, I think is how you deploy it and also how you respond to it in the world. So if it's a piece where everything is in a constructed language, then you may want to think about how you're going to make it legible. Which is true with any medium that is departing from kind of the standard language. It's true with dance. It's true with anything that's a little bit more eclectic, for sure. But it's doable. Set it up in a way that would be okay. Yes.
I have a question from IRC that actually fits well with what you're talking about right now. Is there a consideration of how much online material to write in, given that you won't have subtitles or continuing translation?
Yeah, for sure. I think we were pretty strategic. Also, Shakespeare is long. So there was overall kind of a concern about length. So there was a limit to how much we wanted to do in terms of making it, overly lengthy. As much as I wanted to play with my language as much as I could.